My unhinged neighbor marched into my pool like it was hers. She claimed she and her kids were entitled to use it any time they wanted. The problem was, that pool was clearly on my private property. I finally had my dream pool, a symbol of everything I'd ever worked for, but then a neighbor turned it into a nightmare, shattering not just my property but my sense of peace. What started as a simple act of kindness spiraled into an all-out war, culminating in bolt cutters, a backyard invasion, and a fight that sent one man to jail and nearly cost me everything. My husband, Mark, and I stood in front of our new house in Boise, keys heavy in my hand, still not quite believing it was real. I was 42, and this was the first place I could truly call my own. Not a rental, not a temporary stay, not living by someone else's rules. This was legally and permanently mine. Mark, at 45, and I had spent 7 years, literally 7 entire years, saving every single cent we could possibly scrape together to make this happen. Every bonus, every tax return, every extra dollar we squeezed from our budget went straight into that house fund. I managed a department store, same job for 20 years, same daily grind, same customers who knew me by name. Mark fixed computers and networks downtown. Together, we'd managed to put aside $12,000 for one specific thing, a modest fiberglass pool in the backyard. We even helped install it ourselves, with a friend who knew construction, just to save money. My back still ached from that weekend, and I swear I discovered muscles I didn't know existed. And honestly, that pool meant more to me than the house itself. More than the updated kitchen, more than the renovated bathroom, more than any other fancy feature. Because I grew up poor. The kind of poor where you don't just skip luxuries, you skip necessities. Shoes worn until they fell apart, then taped together for another month. Cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. Talking about owning a swimming pool would have been as absurd as talking about owning a private jet. I'd only swam once in my entire childhood, and I remembered it with the kind of crystal clarity that only comes with truly significant moments. I was 9 years old, skinny, sunburned, and desperately self-conscious, standing at this massive house in the wealthy part of town where my mother worked cleaning twice a week for extra money. The family who lived there had everything we didn't, a sprawling house, expensive cars, furniture from magazines, and most importantly, this enormous in-ground pool with crystal clear blue water and an actual diving board. One afternoon, I still don't know why they did it. Maybe they felt sorry for the poor cleaning lady's daughter. Maybe they were just generous. But the owners told my mother I could use the pool for exactly 1 hour while she finished her work. I still remember every single detail of that hour like it happened yesterday instead of 33 years ago. How nervous I felt walking out to that pool in my old, faded swimsuit that used to belong to a cousin and was already too small. How the wealthy woman smiled at me, but in that way that made it clear she knew exactly how poor we were. How the water felt when I first stepped in, cool, clean, chlorinated, and like nothing I'd ever experienced. How free I felt floating there on my back, staring up at the bright blue Idaho sky, forgetting for 60 perfect minutes that I was the poor kid whose clothes came from donation bins, whose lunch at school was subsidized, and who sometimes pretended not to be hungry because there wasn't enough food at home. I dreamed about having my own pool someday, even though it seemed as impossible as owning a castle or flying to the moon. It was pure fantasy, the kind of impossible luxury that existed in a completely different world from mine. But now it wasn't a fantasy anymore. Now it was real. Now it was sitting in my backyard, filled with water, waiting for me. Our first week in the new house brought a brutal, unrelenting heat wave. Temperatures hitting 108 degrees during the day. The kind of oppressive heat that made the asphalt shimmer and buckle, that made everyone move in slow motion, like walking through honey. Our air conditioning struggled to keep the house below 80, running constantly, driving up electricity bills we were already worried about. I was unpacking boxes in the kitchen, sweating even indoors, when someone knocked on the front door. Hard enough to be heard, but not aggressive, just persistent. I wiped my hands on my shorts and opened the door to find my neighbor from next door, Jennifer, standing on my porch with 4 kids, ranging from maybe 6 to 12 years old. All of them drenched in sweat, faces red and flushed, hair plastered to their foreheads. They looked absolutely miserable. The youngest, a little girl with messy braids, looked like she might start crying from the heat. "Hi, I'm Jennifer," the woman said, her smile seeming genuine. She looked to be in her mid-30s, wearing jean shorts and a gray tank top already dark with sweat stains. "We're your neighbors. I know this is probably weird timing since you just moved in, and I'm so sorry to bother you when you're still getting settled. But..." She gestured helplessly to her kids. "Would it be possible, maybe, for the kids to use your pool for an hour? I know it's a huge ask, and if you say no, I totally understand, but they've never really had the chance to swim in a real pool. This heat is killing all of us. We don't have AC, and the house is like 115 degrees inside. I wouldn't normally ask a neighbor I just met, but it's supposed to stay this hot for at least another week, and they're suffering. I looked at those 4 sweaty, miserable faces. The little girl with braids, 2 boys who looked 8 and 10, and an older girl who might have been 12. And instantly, without even consciously thinking, I saw myself at 9 years old, standing outside that massive house where my mother worked. I saw myself in that too small swimsuit, desperate and hopeful, praying someone would show me kindness and let me experience something I could never afford. The memory hit me with physical force, like someone had actually punched me in the chest. My throat tightened, and my eyes started to burn with tears I refused to let fall in front of a stranger. I glanced back over my shoulder at Mark, who'd appeared in the doorway, probably curious. He looked at my face, really looked at me, and he must have seen something there. Some emotion, some memory surfacing, some vulnerability I couldn't quite hide. Without me saying a single word, without me explaining anything, he gave me a small, understanding nod. He knew my childhood. He knew what swimming meant to me. He knew what that 1 hour in a pool had represented to 9-year-old me. Sure, I said, my voice a little thicker than I'd intended. I cleared my throat. But I'll need to supervise the whole time for safety reasons. I need to be out there with them. Jennifer's entire face lit up like I'd just told her she'd won the lottery. Like I'd given her kids Christmas morning in the middle of July. Oh my God. Thank you so much. You have no idea. This means the world to them. Seriously, we really, really appreciate this. For the next hour, I sat on one of our new deck chairs in the shade, watching those 4 kids play. Jennifer supervised attentively from the pool's edge, feet in the water. The kids were polite, well-behaved, actually saying please and thank you when I offered them our floats. They didn't make too much mess or noise, they mostly just swam and floated, clearly relishing every single second of being in cool water instead of suffering in the brutal heat. About halfway through, Jennifer came over and sat next to me. This is so kind of you, she said, watching her youngest giggle. We moved here 6 months ago, and honestly, I've been worried about making a good impression. You know how it is in a new neighborhood. I get it, I said. We're new, too. Still figuring everything out. The kids have been begging for pool access since we got here, she continued. But lessons are so expensive, and community pools are always packed. This is a real treat for them. I felt that familiar tug in my chest. I'm glad we could help. When the hour was up, I told Jennifer 1 hour, so I kept track on my phone. Jennifer actually had all 4 kids help clean up. They collected the floats, picked up the wet towels, and left the wooden deck spotless. Jennifer thanked me profusely, her eyes actually getting a little wet with gratitude, before shepherding her kids back next door. That night, lying in bed, fan running because the AC couldn't quite keep up, I told Mark I felt good about what we'd done. Someone helped me when I was a kid, I said quietly, staring at the ceiling. Feels right to pass that forward, you know. Like maybe that's why we're supposed to have this pool. Not just for us. Mark squeezed my hand. You did a good thing today. 2 days later, I found a handwritten card in our mailbox. Jennifer had written this long, emotional thank you note in neat cursive, about how the kids hadn't stopped talking about the amazing day, how grateful she was that we'd shown such kindness to total strangers, how it meant everything to her family. Mark read it when he got home and said, you know, maybe the previous owners exaggerated about her being problematic. The realtor mentioned something about neighbor issues, but she seems like just a working mom trying to give her kids some joy in a tough situation. I wanted to believe that. I really did. It felt good to believe that. A week passed, quietly and peacefully. And then another heatwave hit, even harder than the first. Temperatures climbed to 112 degrees, and people were being warned not to go outside during peak hours. Jennifer sent me a text message. I'd given her my cell number during that first visit, asking if she could bring the kids over again the next day because the heat was unbearable. I was exhausted from a particularly brutal shift at the department store. Dealing with angry customers and the heat always made everything worse, and I hesitated when I saw the message. Something in my gut felt slightly off, like a warning bell ringing very quietly. But I also felt like it would be genuinely cruel to say no, especially with temperatures that dangerous. So, I agreed. But this time, I set specific hours, 2 to 4 p.m., clearly stated in my reply text. The next day, Jennifer showed up right on time, all 4 kids already in their swimsuits, looking excited. But this time, things felt subtly different in ways I couldn't quite articulate at first. The kids were definitely louder, more comfortable, making bigger splashes, yelling more freely. They weren't being bad or destructive, exactly, but there was a clear shift from that first careful, grateful visit. Jennifer spent significantly more time on her phone than actually supervising or watching the kids, scrolling through something and occasionally laughing while her youngest daughter swam in the deep end without anyone really paying attention. And when they left a few minutes after 4, I noticed they hadn't cleaned up quite as thoroughly. Wet towels were just left draped over chairs instead of hung up, and a couple of pool toys were still floating in the water. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't want to seem like a demanding neighbor, but I mentioned it to Mark that evening. The vibe was different today, I said, choosing my words carefully. Like they were getting more comfortable. Too comfortable, maybe. Mark frowned while stirring pasta. Did they do anything actually bad? No, not really. Just different. Less grateful. More entitled. I shrugged. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. The following week, Jennifer didn't ask if she could come over. She didn't request permission or check if it was convenient. She just sent me a direct message on Wednesday evening, "We'll be there Saturday at 2. Not a question. A statement of fact. An announcement. I stared at that text message for a long time, feeling distinctly uncomfortable, but also feeling oddly trapped by the situation I'd created. We were brand new to this neighborhood, less than 3 weeks total, and I desperately didn't want to create conflict with our immediate neighbors right off the bat. Everyone always says the worst thing you can do is get into feuds with the people who live right next to you. So, after debating with myself for way too long, I sent back a reluctant, somewhat terse, "Okay." I immediately felt a wave of regret the second I hit send. Saturday came, hot and oppressive again. I was working from home in our small office, trying to finish some scheduling for the store, absorbed in spreadsheets and employee requests. When I finally looked at the clock, I realized with a jolt that it was already 5 p.m. A full hour passed when Jennifer and her kids should have left. I felt my stomach clench with annoyance as I stood up and walked out to the backyard to address the situation. What I found made me stop short in the doorway. Jennifer wasn't supervising the kids at all anymore. She was relaxed in the pool herself, floating on an inflatable raft she'd brought from her own house, definitely not ours, wearing sunglasses and looking like she was at a resort. Meanwhile, her 4 kids were screaming at the top of their lungs, jumping into the pool from the deck over and over, creating enormous splashing waves that sloshed water out onto the wooden boards. "Hey!" I called out, trying very hard to keep my voice friendly and reasonable instead of annoyed. "Could you guys keep it down a bit? I'm trying to work inside, and I really need to concentrate on some important stuff." Jennifer's expression changed instantly and dramatically. The relaxed resort guest vanished, replaced by someone who looked genuinely annoyed and inconvenienced by my very reasonable request. She lifted her sunglasses and gave me this look, part irritated, part offended, like I'd just asked her to do something completely unreasonable. And she said, in this passive-aggressive tone that dripped with attitude, "Oh, sure. We'll leave soon, I guess." But she was clearly irritated that I dared to ask. They did leave about 15 minutes later, but the entire dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally. I could absolutely feel it. Something had changed, and not for the better. A few days later, I got home from work around 7 p.m., already dark outside, completely exhausted from a 9-hour shift on my feet. I was walking through the house, thinking about what to make for a quick dinner, when I heard splashing noises coming from the backyard. Not just gentle water sounds, but full splashing, kids playing. My heart started beating faster with a mix of confusion and concern as I walked toward the back door. When I stepped outside and looked at the pool area, I froze in place. All 4 of Jennifer's kids were in the pool, swimming, splashing, playing Marco Polo, fully engaged, completely and totally alone. Not a single adult anywhere in sight. No Jennifer sitting on the deck. No other parent watching. Just 4 kids, the youngest still only 6 years old, swimming in the dark in someone else's pool with zero supervision. My heart wasn't just beating fast anymore. It was pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't just rude or inappropriate anymore. This was dangerous. This was a massive liability. And legally, if something happened to one of those kids, if someone drowned, if someone hit their head, if there was any kind of accident, I could be held responsible. I could be sued. I could potentially face criminal charges for having an unsecured pool that neighborhood kids were accessing without permission or supervision. I immediately pulled my phone out of my pocket with shaking hands and called Jennifer's number. It rang and rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I called a 3rd time, and this time she actually answered on the 6th or 7th ring. "Hello?" She sounded casual, like nothing was wrong. "Where are you?" I said, not bothering to hide the stress in my voice. "Your kids are in my pool right now. Alone. No adult supervising at all." "Oh, they know how to swim," she said, with total indifference, like I was being ridiculous. They know the way to your house. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal, I said firmly. They're children. The youngest one is 6. And this is my property, which means I'm legally responsible if anything happens. She sighed, like I was the most annoying person in the world. Fine, I'll be right there. 20 long, agonizing minutes passed before Jennifer finally showed up to collect her children. 20 minutes where I stood outside watching those kids swim, terrified that someone would get hurt on my watch, unable to go inside and relax because I felt obligated to supervise since she wasn't. When she finally arrived, walking across our yard like she had every right to be there, she didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge that she'd done anything wrong. She just called her kids out of the pool and said, with that same indifferent tone, "Come on, guys. Time to go home." I felt something harden inside me. I knew I needed to establish a firm boundary right then and there before the situation spiraled any further out of control. "Jennifer," I said clearly and directly, making sure she was looking at me. "From now on, you need to let me know before any visits to the pool. Every single time. And there always needs to be an adult supervising the kids while they're in the water. Always. Non-negotiable." Jennifer's face tightened with obvious irritation, and she gave me what I can only describe as a hostile look. "Fine, whatever," she muttered. But the tone made it absolutely clear she was just saying what I wanted to hear to get me to stop talking. She wasn't actually agreeing. She wasn't acknowledging my very reasonable boundaries. She was just trying to end an uncomfortable conversation. That night in bed, Mark said what I was already thinking, but hadn't wanted to admit out loud. "She's pushing boundaries on purpose, testing how much she can get away with. We need to set way harder limits before this situation gets seriously worse." I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above us. "I know. I just didn't want neighbor drama in our first month here." "I think we might have it anyway," Mark said quietly. The following weekend, Mark and I desperately needed a day completely to ourselves. Just us, with no work stress, no obligations, no neighbors, no anything. We'd had an absolutely brutal week. I'd dealt with 3 employee conflicts at the store, and Mark had been working overtime trying to fix a major network issue at his company. We needed to reconnect and relax in our own home, the home we'd worked so hard for. It was supposed to be our sanctuary, after all. Saturday morning arrived, bright and hot, and Mark and I were sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee, actually feeling relaxed for the first time in days, when someone knocked loudly on the front door. Mark and I looked at each other. We weren't expecting anyone. It was barely 9:30 in the morning. I opened the door, and there was Jennifer, bright and cheerful, with all 4 kids already dressed in their swimsuits, holding towels, looking excited and ready to swim. "Perfect day for the pool," she announced with this big, expectant smile. I felt my entire body tense up. This was the moment. I couldn't avoid it anymore. I took a deep breath, gathering every single ounce of courage I had in my body, and said as politely but firmly as I could manage, "Actually, today doesn't work for us. Mark and I need some private time together today." I watched Jennifer literally freeze on my doorstep. I watched her entire expression change from friendly and cheerful to ice cold in approximately 2 seconds flat. It was like watching a mask drop, like seeing who she really was underneath the neighborly persona. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, and her voice had dropped to this chilly, hostile tone that made my skin prickle. "You're not even using the pool." The accusation in her voice was unmistakable, like I was doing something wrong by denying her access to my own property. "That doesn't matter," I said, forcing myself to stay firm and calm, even though my heart was absolutely racing and my hands wanted to shake. "It's our private property, and we're entitled to privacy in our own home." Jennifer stared at me for a long, extremely uncomfortable moment. Her kids were standing behind her, looking confused and disappointed, and I felt bad for them. They were just kids who wanted to swim, but this wasn't their fault. This was their mother pushing boundaries and creating entitled expectations. Then Jennifer said, loud enough for all 4 of her children to hear crystal clear, "Wow. Okay then. That's really selfish." She emphasized the word, selfish, like she was explaining my character flaw to her children, like she was teaching them a lesson about what kind of person I was. Then she turned around sharply and walked back toward her house, and I heard her front door slam hard enough that the sound echoed across both yards. I stood there in my doorway, literally shaking from adrenaline and discomfort. Mark came up behind me, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "Not really," I admitted. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "You set a boundary. That's healthy. But it sure didn't feel healthy. It felt terrible. Over the next 3 days, things escalated from uncomfortable to unmistakably hostile in ways that made it very clear Jennifer was deliberately retaliating. On Sunday afternoon, I found a fast food bag full of greasy trash, burger wrappers, French fry containers, sticky soda cups, thrown over our fence into our backyard. Not accidentally dropped, thrown with force. On Monday evening, our homeowners association called, saying they'd received an anonymous noise complaint about excessive disturbance coming from our property. The woman on the phone seemed skeptical herself because she noted that we were literally the quietest people on the entire block, according to multiple other neighbors, but she was required by policy to follow up. On Tuesday night, music started blasting from Jennifer's house at exactly 11 p.m., right when Mark and I were trying to fall asleep for work. Loud, bass-heavy music that made our bedroom walls vibrate. It continued until almost 1 a.m. On Wednesday morning, Jennifer's car was parked in a way that strategically blocked a significant portion of our driveway entrance, forcing Mark to do multiple complicated reverses just to get his car out to work. He was late to an important meeting because of it. It was clear, deliberate retaliation. There was no doubt in my mind. And honestly, it scared me a little bit. This felt unhinged. Genuinely worried about the situation escalating even further, worried about what she might do next, about property damage, about false accusations, about our safety and legal liability. Mark and I made the difficult decision to invest $800 we really didn't have lying around in our already tight budget into a complete, comprehensive security camera system. $800 that could have gone towards so many other things. We needed new tires for my car, the broken dishwasher, a small emergency fund we didn't have. But none of those things mattered as much as protecting ourselves and our home from someone who was clearly escalating her harassment. We hired a professional security company for a consultation. They recommended a 6-camera system covering every vulnerable angle, the entire backyard with overlapping fields of view, all the gates from multiple perspectives, the pool area in high definition, the driveway and front entrance, the side yards, everything. The company said we needed complete coverage with no blind spots. And honestly, after everything that had happened, I agreed completely. We needed ironclad evidence if things got worse. We needed protection. We needed to be able to prove what happened in our own yard. The day the cameras were being professionally installed, a technician up on a ladder mounting equipment, Jennifer saw what was happening from her yard and came marching straight over to our front door. I saw her coming through the window, and my stomach immediately clenched with anxiety. When I opened the door, her face was absolutely furious, red with anger, eyes flashing with rage. "Are you filming me?" she demanded before I could even say hello. Her voice was shaking with fury. "Are you recording me and my family without our consent? That's illegal." Mark appeared next to me. He'd been working from home that day and answered in the calmest voice I'd ever heard him use, professional, controlled, completely even. "We're filming our own property for our protection and security. It's completely legal to record what happens on your own property. The cameras don't point into your yard at all. This is invasion of privacy." Jennifer's voice was getting louder, more shrill. "I'll talk to my lawyer about this. You can't just spy on people." "You're welcome to consult with anyone you'd like," Mark said with that same even tone. "But the cameras are staying. We have every legal right to have security cameras on our own property." Jennifer stared at both of us with pure hatred in her eyes. Then she turned and marched back to her house. But I noticed she kept looking back at the cameras being installed, and there was something in her expression that went beyond just anger. She looked furious that we protected ourselves. After she left, Mark and I decided we needed more information about who we were actually dealing with. We walked down the street that evening and talked to some of the other neighbors, people who'd lived in this area for years. We found an older couple sitting on their porch 4 houses down, who introduced themselves as the Hendersons. When I mentioned we were neighbors of Jennifer's, their expressions changed immediately. "Oh," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. "How's that going for you?" "We're having some issues," Mark said diplomatically. Mr. Henderson shook his head. "She sued us 2 years ago. Property line dispute. Claimed our fence was 6 inches over onto her side, demanded we pay to move it. Cost us $3,000 in legal fees before the surveyor proved she was completely wrong." "She's done this before?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Multiple times," Mrs. Henderson said. "Talked to Jerry, 2 houses down from you. We found Jerry in his garage, working on an old motorcycle. When we asked about Jennifer, he didn't even look up from his work. That woman," he said, tightening a bolt, "threatened to sue me for noise violations because my dog barked. My dog barely makes a sound. I ended up spending $2,000 on soundproofing just to make her go away." "Did she actually sue?" Mark asked. "Threatened to. Showed up with paperwork, the whole thing." I gave in. He finally looked up at us. You having trouble with her? Starting to, I admitted. Jerry nodded knowingly. Document everything. Get cameras if you don't have them. That woman collects lawsuits like some people collect stamps. The most disturbing story came from a woman named Patricia, who'd lived on our street for 12 years. She invited us into her living room and told us very seriously about what happened to the Pizza Palace chain. Jennifer claimed she had an allergic reaction, Patricia said. There was peanut contamination. Sued them for $100,000. The owners fought it because they swore their kitchen was peanut-free, but the legal fees destroyed them. All 3 locations closed. Was the allergy real? I asked. Patricia paused. I've seen Jennifer eat Thai food with peanut sauce at the neighborhood block party. Draw your own conclusions. Mark and I walked back to our house in silence, both of us processing what we'd just learned. When we got inside, we sat down at the kitchen table and looked at each other. We need to be extremely careful, Mark said. Like, document everything, keep our distance, never give her any ammunition. I nodded, feeling genuine fear now instead of just annoyance. I'm blocking her number, I said. No more text messages, no more communication unless absolutely necessary. We decided right then on a strict policy, complete distance from Jennifer and her family. Cordial head nods if we happen to see each other outside, but otherwise zero interaction. No conversations, no favors, no involvement. We were going to protect ourselves. 3 days after that conversation, there was a knock on our door late on a Friday evening. I looked through the peephole and saw Jennifer standing there, alone, without her kids. My stomach dropped. Mark and I exchanged a look, and he nodded. We'd answer together, a united front. I opened the door but didn't invite her in, didn't step aside, just stood there in the doorway with Mark right behind me. Jennifer had this carefully practiced expression on her face that I can only describe as studied regret. Rehearsed remorse. She looked like she'd been preparing this speech in a mirror. I've been doing a lot of thinking and reflecting, she said in this soft, humble voice that sounded nothing like her actual personality. And I realize I really overreacted to everything. I was stressed with the kids and the heat, and I took advantage of your generosity, and I'm genuinely sorry. I was wondering if maybe we could start over, be friendly neighbors again, like we were at the beginning. I looked at her carefully, studied her face, tried to see if there was any genuine remorse there, or if this was just another manipulation. And honestly, I couldn't tell. But I also knew it didn't matter. We'd made our decision. I appreciate you apologizing, I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral and polite. But Mark and I prefer to keep things private and maintain just a cordial but distant neighbor relationship going forward. We're not interested in getting more personally involved. I watched Jennifer's face carefully as understanding dawned on her. I saw the exact moment she realized what I was really saying, what I was really telling her. She'd lost access to the pool. Permanently. Completely. Forever. That door was closed and locked, and it was never opening again. Her practiced apologetic expression cracked and fell away, replaced briefly by something that looked like pure anger before she got control of herself again. All right then, she said tersely. Have a nice evening. She turned and left without another word, and I quietly closed and locked the door. Over the next 2 weeks, our security cameras, those $800 cameras that were worth every penny, documented something that was equal parts sad and disturbing. At various times throughout each day, Jennifer would come and stand on the other side of our fence, just staring at the pool. Not for a few seconds, for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just standing there looking at water that wasn't hers, that she couldn't access anymore. The cameras timestamped each incident. Tuesday at 2:15 p.m., Jennifer standing at the fence for 12 minutes. Thursday at 5:40 p.m., Jennifer standing at the fence for 14 minutes. Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m., Jennifer standing at the fence for 11 minutes. It was obsessive. It was weird. It made me deeply uncomfortable. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, the cameras caught something significantly more disturbing than just staring. The footage showed Jennifer approaching the exterior side of our pool's filtration system, which was accessible from outside our fence because of how the previous owners had positioned it, and actually trying to tamper with the controls. She was literally reaching through the fence slats, trying to turn knobs and flip switches, clearly attempting to damage or sabotage our pool equipment. She was there for almost 3 full minutes before she suddenly looked up, noticed the camera pointed directly at her, and quickly pulled her hands back and walked away fast. Mark and I watched that footage together that evening, and I felt scared for the first time. Not just annoyed or frustrated, actually scared of what she might do next. We need to be ready, Mark said grimly. Document everything, save all the footage, keep records. A week later, Mark and I had to travel out of town for my childhood best friend's wedding. We'd been planning this trip for months, since before we even found this house, since before we knew we'd have a neighbor situation to worry about. We'd bought plane tickets back in February, booked a nice hotel in downtown Portland, bought an expensive gift off the registry, arranged time off work. It was a 4-day trip, leaving early Thursday morning and returning Sunday evening. My friend Emma was getting married, and I was supposed to be there. I'd promised her a year ago that I wouldn't miss it for anything. We'd been best friends since elementary school, had been through everything together. And this was supposed to be one of the happiest weekends of my life. But now, the thought of leaving our house completely unattended with Jennifer living right next door made me genuinely, physically anxious. I lay awake multiple nights that week, just worrying about what she might do while we were gone, what she might damage, what she might steal, what false accusations she might make. The possibilities seemed endless and terrifying. We spent an entire evening, almost 4 hours, preparing the house like we were preparing for a siege. We went to a hardware store and bought the heaviest duty padlocks they sold, the kind with hardened steel shackles that the packaging claimed were bolt cutter resistant. We installed them on every single gate, front, back, both side gates, the fence door that led to the trash bins. We double-checked every single window lock in the house. We made sure the garage door was secure, and that all our valuables were documented and photographed. We set all 6 security cameras to maximum alert mode, carefully configuring each one to send immediate push notifications to both our phones the instant any motion whatsoever was detected anywhere on the property. Even a cat walking through the yard would trigger an alert. We tested the system multiple times to make sure it worked perfectly. We walked around the entire property perimeter, checking for any vulnerabilities, any ways someone could get in that we hadn't considered. We also had a long conversation with our neighbor 2 houses down, Jerry, the same guy who'd soundproofed his garage. We explained our situation and asked if he could please keep an eye on our house while we were gone. Jerry, a retired firefighter in his 60s, took the request seriously, promising he'd walk past our place twice a day and call us immediately if he saw anything suspicious. Thursday and Friday passed without incident. We were in Portland, enjoying the wedding festivities. I was reuniting with old friends I hadn't seen in years, and I was starting to relax, starting to think maybe I'd been paranoid. Then Saturday morning happened. At 10 a.m., I was sitting in the hotel room getting ready for the wedding ceremony, putting on makeup while Mark was in the shower, when my phone buzzed with a camera alert. Motion detected at the side gate. I picked up my phone and opened the camera app, expecting to see maybe a delivery person, or a cat, or something innocent. What I saw instead made my blood run completely cold. Jennifer was standing at our side gate with large metal bolt cutters, professional-grade, heavy-duty tools, literally cutting through our reinforced padlock. I watched on my phone screen in real time, helpless from 230 miles away, as she methodically cut through the metal. It took her about 45 seconds of serious effort, sawing back and forth, but she got through it. The padlock fell to the ground in 2 pieces. She pulled the gate open wide. And then her 4 kids ran in, excited and laughing, wearing swimsuits. And then, and this is what made everything so much worse, an unknown adult man walked in behind them, in his 30s, heavy-set, carrying an absolutely enormous cooler that looked packed with ice and drinks. I sat there in that Portland hotel room, staring at my phone screen, watching strangers invade my property, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't call out to them. I was completely powerless. Mark. I called toward the bathroom, my voice coming out high and panicked. Mark, you need to see this right now. He came out with a towel around his waist, hair still wet, and I showed him my phone. We watched together as the situation unfolded in our backyard, 230 miles away. Jennifer directed the man to our garage, our locked garage, except she clearly knew where we kept the spare key hidden under a fake rock. How did she know that? And they went inside and came out with our charcoal and lighter fluid. Our supplies. They started setting up our grill for a barbecue. Jennifer changed into a bikini right there on our deck. The man took off his shirt. All 4 kids jumped into the pool, screaming and splashing. They were having a party in our yard, on our property, with our stuff. I called Mark's phone, even though he was standing right next to me, realized how stupid that was, and hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. We have to go back, I said. Right now. We have to go home. Mark was already pulling on clothes. I'll call the hotel, cancel our room. You call your friend, apologize about the wedding. That was one of the hardest phone calls I've ever made. Calling my best friend 2 hours before her wedding ceremony to tell her I couldn't be there. She was disappointed and hurt, understandably. But when I explained that our house was being invaded by our insane neighbor, she understood, sort of. As much as anyone could understand such a bizarre situation. We talked several times in the weeks after, and she eventually understood why I had to leave. But there'd always be this small distance between us that hadn't been there before. Some things you can't fully come back from, even with understanding. Mark and I threw everything into our suitcases, checked out of the hotel, got in our car, and started the long drive back to Boise. 4.5 hours of highway. 4.5 hours of me obsessively checking the camera feeds on my phone, watching this group of people use our home like it was theirs. I saw them grilling, eating, drinking beers from that cooler, the kids playing in the pool, Jennifer laughing with this man I'd never seen before, clearly her boyfriend or date or whatever he was. She gave him a tour of our yard, pointing to different areas, gesturing expansively like she owned the place, like she was showing off her property to a guest. They made themselves completely at home for hours. When Mark and I finally pulled up to our house, it was exactly 4 p.m. 6 hours. They'd been there for 6 full hours. And they were still there, still using everything. The grill was still smoking with charcoal remnants. There was trash scattered everywhere, beer bottles, paper plates, napkins, food wrappers. Our nice wooden deck was visibly stained with dark splashes of spilled barbecue sauce. And there was one of our large ceramic planters, the expensive decorative one we'd bought specifically for the new house, smashed into pieces on the ground. Mark parked on the street rather than pulling into our driveway. We wanted to approach quietly, not alert them we were home. We entered through the front door using our key, walked through the quiet house, it felt so violating knowing they were in our backyard, and came through the side corridor to the gate that was still standing wide open. The destroyed padlock lying in pieces on the ground as evidence. We appeared in the pool area from a direction they clearly didn't expect. They probably assumed we'd come through the back door if we came home early. Jennifer was floating on her inflatable raft, sunglasses on, drink in hand, completely and utterly relaxed, like she was at a resort she'd paid for. When she saw us standing there, she froze. I watched all the color drain from her face. She nearly fell off the raft. "Get out," I said. My voice was shaking, actually trembling, but it came out hard and controlled. "Get out of our house right now." Jennifer actually tried to justify what she'd done. Actually tried. "Oh my God, you guys just calm down," she said, trying to smile like this was all a misunderstanding. "We were just using the pool since you were traveling. You weren't here, so what's the actual problem?" That's when Mark completely lost his temper in a way I'd never seen in our entire relationship. "Problem?" he yelled. Actually yelled, his voice booming across the yard. "You cut through our lock. You broke into our property. Look." He pointed with a shaking finger at the destroyed padlock still lying on the ground where she'd left it. The man who'd been lounging on one of our deck chairs stood up. He was clearly drunk. I could see it in how he moved, slightly uncoordinated, eyes a bit unfocused. He'd been drinking for hours. He stumbled slightly and then walked toward Mark with this aggressive, challenging posture. "Hey, man, you need to relax," he said in this slurred, hostile tone, getting way too close to Mark's face. "Stop talking to her like that." Mark immediately positioned himself physically between this drunk stranger and me, protective stance, and said firmly, "You need to leave our property right now before we call the police." The drunk guy actually laughed, a mean, mocking laugh. "You guys need to learn how to share," he said, taking another step closer, invading Mark's personal space. So uptight, so selfish. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. But I managed to dial 911 while this aggressive drunk man continued advancing on my husband. Getting closer, invading our space on our own property. "What's your emergency?" the operator answered. "There are trespassers on my property," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They broke our lock and invaded our home. One of them is drunk and getting aggressive with my husband." The drunk man was still talking, still getting closer to Mark, saying we were horrible people, that we didn't deserve this house, that we should learn to be less selfish and uptight. His face was red and angry. Jennifer, finally realizing the situation was spiraling completely out of her control, started crying, or maybe fake crying, I genuinely couldn't tell anymore. "You guys, please. This doesn't need to involve the police," she said, her voice breaking. "He didn't mean anything. We didn't mean anything bad." But the drunk man ignored her completely and kept advancing on Mark, getting more aggressive, more hostile. Mark warned him one final time, voice dead serious. "Stop right there. Leave now." The drunk man didn't stop. Instead, he shoved Mark hard in the chest with both hands. Enough force to make Mark stumble backward a couple steps. And Mark, my mild-mannered IT guy husband, who I'd never seen in a physical fight in his entire life, reacted on pure protective instinct and threw a punch that connected solidly with the drunk guy's face. The man's head snapped back, and he stumbled, fell backward, and then they were both on the ground actually fighting, actually throwing punches at each other while all four of Jennifer's kids started screaming in absolute terror. I was still on the phone with 911, describing the fight happening right in front of me. "They're fighting," I told the operator, my voice breaking. "They're physically fighting." Jennifer was screaming hysterically for them to stop, but neither of them could hear her or didn't care. They were fully engaged in this brawl, rolling on our deck, throwing punches, grappling. Our neighbor from 2 houses down, Jerry, the same one we talked to about Jennifer's history, came running into our yard because he'd heard all the screaming and commotion. He was yelling that he'd also called the police. Between the two of us, we managed to physically separate the 2 men. Jerry was holding Mark, who had blood streaming from his nose and visible scratches on his face and arms, while the drunk guy was lying on the ground with one eye already swelling purple and his mouth bleeding significantly all over our deck. When the police arrived exactly 8 minutes later, I know because I was still on the phone with dispatch and they told me, they found an absolutely chaotic scene. The destroyed padlock lying on the ground as clear evidence. The grill still slightly warm and smoking. Trash scattered everywhere across the property. 2 grown men, both visibly injured and bleeding. 4 children crying and clearly traumatized. Jennifer hysterical, crying and barely coherent. 2 officers took control of the situation quickly. They separated everyone into different groups so we couldn't talk to each other. And they started asking for identification from everyone. Mark and I gave them our IDs along with proof of ownership for the house. Jennifer gave hers. And when the drunk guy reluctantly handed over his ID and the officers ran it through their system, something interesting came up on their screen. The man had an active, outstanding warrant for his arrest. Multiple unpaid traffic tickets that had accumulated into a significant fine, and he'd missed his court date. The officers looked at each other, looked at him, and told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. He was arrested right there, handcuffed while still bleeding from his mouth, and placed in the back of one of the police cars. Jennifer absolutely lost it. Started screaming, literally screaming, that this was all our fault, that we'd ruined everything, that she was going to sue us for assault and harassment and whatever else she could think of. The officers told her very firmly that she needed to calm down immediately or she would also be arrested for disturbing the peace and public disorder. That finally made her stop screaming, but she kept crying loudly, dramatically, making these sobbing sounds that seemed designed for maximum effect. The officers asked if we had any video evidence of what had happened, and I immediately pulled out my phone and showed them the security camera footage. They stood there on our deck, watching the feeds on my phone screen, Jennifer cutting the padlock, the group entering the property, 6 hours of them using our home and belongings, the setup of the grill, the drinking, all of it documented in high definition with timestamps. After reviewing all the evidence, both video and physical, the officers formally warned Jennifer about criminal trespassing and criminal vandalism. They also warned Mark about the physical altercation and assault, but they acknowledged in their report the context of defending private property against an aggressive, intoxicated trespasser who had initiated physical contact. Given the circumstances and the clear evidence of breaking and entering, they decided not to arrest Mark. Jennifer was formally escorted back to her house by one of the officers, still crying, with her 4 kids following behind her, looking absolutely shell-shocked and traumatized by everything they'd witnessed. I felt terrible for those kids. They were innocent in all of this. Their mother had created this situation, and they'd had to watch it explode. Mark and I spent the next 3 hours documenting every single piece of damage to our property for the official police report. We photographed the destroyed padlock from multiple angles. We measured and photographed the barbecue sauce stains on the deck. We documented every piece of trash. We took detailed photos of the smashed planter. We photographed Mark's injuries and my emotional state. We saved all 6 hours of security camera footage to multiple backup drives. We were thorough, meticulous, because we knew this wasn't over. 3 weeks later, right when I was starting to think maybe it actually was over, I received a certified letter in the mail. The return address was from a law firm in downtown Boise. My stomach dropped as I signed for it. The letter was from an attorney representing Jennifer, threatening a lawsuit for assault and battery against Mark and against me for emotional distress and harassment. They were seeking damages, significant damages. The letter used intimidating legal language and made serious accusations. Mark and I sat at our kitchen table reading this letter together, and I felt physically sick. This was exactly what the neighbors had warned us about. This was her pattern: sue people, make their lives hell, force them to spend money on lawyers, whether she had a case or not. We consulted with an attorney, which cost us $1,200 we absolutely did not have in our budget after already spending $800 on cameras and dealing with all the property damage. But we didn't have a choice. We needed legal protection. Our attorney was a middle-aged woman who specialized in property disputes and personal injury defense. She listened to our entire story, took detailed notes, and then asked to see all our documentation. We showed her everything: police reports, photos, witness statements from neighbors, and most importantly, all 6 hours of security camera footage showing the entire invasion from start to finish. She sat in her office, watching those videos on her computer, occasionally making notes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. When she finished, she looked up at us and said very clearly, "You have an extremely strong case for self-defense and defense of property. This footage is comprehensive evidence. You're going to be fine. But I need to send all of this to opposing counsel." She drafted a detailed formal response letter to Jennifer's attorney with all of our evidence attached, every single video file, every photo, every document. She sent it via certified mail with proof of delivery required. 2 weeks passed with zero communication. Then our attorney called us on a Friday afternoon. I saw her name pop up on my phone, and my heart started racing before I even answered. "Good news," she said immediately. "Jennifer's attorney watched the footage and has withdrawn from the case. He's refused to continue representing her." I felt my entire body relax with relief I hadn't even known I was holding. "Really? Really? Really?" she confirmed. "He sent me a brief note saying he's dropping her as a client. Between you and me, he probably realized she lied to him about what actually happened, and he doesn't want his name associated with a frivolous lawsuit." Through our attorney, we sent Jennifer one final formal notification. She had 30 days to pay us $2,800 for property damage, legal fees, and other expenses, or we would pursue criminal charges and file a counter-lawsuit. For 27 days, there was complete silence. No response, no contact, nothing. Then on day 28, 2 days before the deadline, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. Inside was a cashier's check for exactly $2,800. No note, no apology, just the money. But we weren't done protecting ourselves. Our attorney helped us file for a permanent restraining order against Jennifer, citing the documented harassment, property damage, and pattern of escalating behavior. With all our evidence, the judge granted it immediately. The order legally required Jennifer to maintain a minimum distance of 300 feet from our property at all times. If she violated it, even once, she could be arrested immediately. We had that order delivered to her by a sheriff's deputy, official and formal, so there was no question she'd received it and understood the terms. 4 months later, on a cold morning in late autumn, I was leaving for work when I saw it. A "for sale" sign had appeared overnight in front of Jennifer's house. Bright red letters, a professional real estate photo of the property. She was leaving. Moving. Getting out. I told Mark that night, and we both felt this huge wave of relief. It was finally over. She was actually leaving. 6 weeks later, we saw moving trucks in her driveway. We watched from our window. We weren't about to go outside and risk any interaction that might violate the restraining order from our end. As she and her family loaded up and left, the kids looked sad, especially the youngest girl who was still crying, and it broke my heart knowing they'd been caught in the middle of their mother's choices. A few weeks after that, a new family moved in. A young couple in their late 20s, no kids, both seemed professional and friendly, but appropriately reserved. They waved hello when they saw us, but maintained respectful distance. Perfect neighbors, honestly. The kind of people who understand boundaries. One evening, after the new neighbors were settled and the air felt truly clear, Mark and I got in the pool that had caused so much trouble and chaos and conflict, but had also been worth every second of fighting for. We floated there together under the emerging stars. The water was perfect temperature. The night was peaceful, and everything was finally quiet. Was it worth it? I asked quietly. All of it. Mark squeezed my hand under the water. Would you do it again? Go through all of that? I thought about that question seriously. Thought about the stress, the fear, the confrontation, the lawsuit, all of it. And then I thought about 9-year-old me, the little poor girl in the too small swimsuit who'd gotten 1 hour in a pool and had carried that dream for 33 years through poverty and struggle and endless work towards something that had seemed impossible. That dream that wasn't impossible anymore. That was real. That was mine. Yeah, I said finally. I would. Because it's ours. We earned it. And nobody gets to take that from us. We floated there together in the dark in our pool, in our yard, in our home, the home we'd fought for. And for the first time since we'd moved in, it actually felt like the sanctuary we'd always wanted it to be. The dream I'd carried since I was 9 was real, and that made it all worth it.